Well, welcome back. I hope you all had a chance to enjoy some coffee and snacks. And we will now move into a very special part of the program, a celebration for the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See's 2018 International Woman of Courage. I think our State Department spokeswoman, Heather Nauert, who hosted this year's 2018 awards ceremony, said it best. We know that women's voices are critical to global security, prosperity, and peace, which is why the U.S. Department of State annually presents the International Women of Courage Awards. Each awardee's story is an inspiring reminder of how individuals can make a difference. To tell you more about one inspiring story of how one sister working on the front lines made a difference, I would like to invite Ambassador Gingrich to the lectern.
Thank you. And I just want to thank the first panel for the fascinating and important discussion. I want to assure you that defeating the global scourge of human trafficking is a priority for the United States government. President Trump has pledged that he will bring the full force and weight of the United States to combat this epidemic. And as the United States ambassador to the Holy See, I am personally committed to this cause. So before we welcome the next panel, I'd like to take a moment to once again acknowledge Sister Maria Elena Barini. 2 weeks ago, Sister Barini was honored as an International Woman of Courage by the First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Melania Trump. I had the distinct honor to be present for this occasion. The International Woman of Courage Award is given annually to women who show extraordinary heroism to advance peace, justice, and human dignity. Out of a deep commitment to service, at the age of 19, Sister Barini entered the novitiate of the Sisters of Charity of St. Joan Antietam. For more than 30 years, she served as a teacher in Chad, where she discovered a love for the people, the traditions, language, and religion. She also witnessed war, injustice, and indescribable horrors. For the last 10 years, Sister Barini has served the community of Bokaranga in the Central African Republic. Last year, when thousands of people were forced to flee from their homes because of war, Sister Barini's mission provided refuge and care. Today, Sister Barini remains hopeful that peace is possible in the Central African Republic. And now we have a short video for you. I hope you enjoy.
I'd like to introduce you to Sister Maria Elena Bernini. She's from Italy.
This year, the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See nominated Sister Maria Elena Barini for the annual Secretary of State's 2018 International Women of Courage Award. Out of dozens of nominees, Sister Elena was selected alongside 9 other courageous women. This prestigious award honors women from around the globe who have exemplified exceptional courage and leadership in advocating for human rights, women's equality, and social progress, often at great personal risk. Sister Elena has been working at the Catholic Mission in Bokaranga, Central African Republic, since 2007 and lived through the war there in 2013 and 2014. Thousands of internally displaced fled their homes and took refuge at Sister Elena's mission, where they were welcomed and given refuge. Sister Elena traveled to Washington, D.C. to receive her award, which was presented to her by First Lady Melania Trump. After the ceremony, Ambassador Callista Gingrich congratulated the 2018 International Women of Courage at a reception in their honor. Although Sister Elena personally accepted the award, her nomination is symbolic of work all of the sisters do worldwide. The U.S. Embassy to the Holy See congratulates Sister Elena on her award and thanks all the sisters for the work they do as peace builders across the globe.
Thank you, Sister Barini. Would you please come forward? We are so proud and honored to know you, and I just want to thank you for all that you do. God bless.
Grazie, grazie mille. Benedica anche lei. Benedica anche lei.
Ambassador, for that touching tribute to Sister Barini. At this time, I'd like to invite our panel moderator, Philippa Hitchen, and the panelists to come up and take their seats for our second panel discussion on women religious in conflict zones. We will follow the same format as the first panel with one small change, which is at the end of the Q&A discussion, Philippa is going to provide a brief summary of key points from both panels before we begin closing remarks. Philippa, I'll turn it over to you. Oh, I think it's right here.
Thank you, Tanya. Welcome back to everybody. And this is going to be our second panel discussion on women religious working in conflict zones. We talk about conflict zones rather than just war zones because, as we'll hear, conflicts and the need to support marginalized communities is also a problem in the most prosperous and apparently peaceful societies as well. It's not just in countries torn by civil wars. Again, in my work over the years, I've met some extraordinarily inspiring women, sisters who have come to talk to me on their way through the Vatican, on their way from one country to another. I'd like to mention in particular, again, a sister who, quite near the beginning of my time here, came to talk to me about her work in war-torn El Salvador at the time. She's a school sister of Notre Dame, Sister Kathy Arata. She was helping women, particularly, to survive the trauma that they'd been through, to combat violence in society and domestic violence in the home, and to help women develop skills to earn a living, to lift their families, themselves, out of poverty. But again, she was just one of many, many, many sisters who share her same passion for justice and peace, that same commitment, continuous commitment to the people they serve, the same courage, just like we've heard, the same courage, risking their lives to stay with the communities that they're working with, even in the face of the most obvious dangers and persecution. So without further ado, I'd like to come to our panelists for this second part of the program. Sisters working on the front lines. First of all, we're going to hear from Sister Judith Pereira. Many of you know her. She's a familiar face as the Executive Director of Solidarity with South Sudan, one of the 3 partner organizations in sponsoring this seminar. Sister Judith is of the Congregation of the Religious of Jesus and Mary. She has a master's in agricultural engineering and education, and she worked using those skills as a missionary in Africa, focusing on education and particularly women's empowerment. She's been involved in advocacy for women at the United Nations as well as here in the Vatican. She's a familiar face who never says no to an interview. I can vouch for that. And since 2014, she's served as the Executive Director of Solidarity with South Sudan. Sister Judith, if you'd like to just briefly introduce yourself and your work.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for coming and being here, and also inviting me to share this event. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Solidarity since 2014. And in this field, we come here just representing Solidarity because there are many, many sisters. I'm thankful, and thank God, not only sisters, we are mixed communities, so we can share our mission with religious men and priests. So what women religious are doing in South Sudan is amazing and defines a lot what sisters can do. A part of that, I belong to a missionary congregation present in Syria and Pakistan, and we can imagine the kind of conflicts we endure, in both belongings. We have suffered what women suffer: raping, murder, attacks. So we come also here as wounded women, with other women sisters that are suffering this daily. To begin this panel, and talking to Philippa and the others, the other day we say that most of our congregations were founded in times of conflict, after French revolutions, wars, or tragedies. So it's not strange that women sisters are in conflict areas. It's like our own charism to be there where no one can be, or to remain where others can't remain because of their own life choices. We have chosen a certain life that allows us to remain and be. So if we are not there, we should question ourselves as sisters, no? Where are we? In the most comfortable places? And I want also to name again Sister Kathy Arata, because for Solidarity with South Sudan was like the spirit, the soul. She's now retired in Baltimore. Anytime we go there, we try to visit her, and she keeps us up in the spirit. Now, the spirit of solidarity was begun by Sister Kathy and Sister Pat. So I want to thank her also from here.
Thank you very much, Sister Judith. I said at the beginning, this is not just about countries like South Sudan torn by devastating civil war, but also about working in any places where there is conflict. Sister Carmen is going to talk to us a little bit about this. Sister Carmen Bandeo from Argentina. She's a Holy Spirit missionary sister, the same congregation, I believe, as the Slovak Sister Veronika Rakova, who was killed in South Sudan 2 years ago. So a very concrete example of how the sisters continue to put their lives at risk on the front lines. Sister Carmen, you've worked in education in your native Argentina, in Taiwan. You've also worked extensively in prison ministry and in the anti-trafficking efforts. You've been involved in advocacy for migrants at the United Nations. You're currently the mission and JPIC person for your congregation. If you'd just like to introduce your work a little bit for us for a moment or two.
Good morning. Today I come here not speaking about my congregation or from the experience of my congregation. I wanted to be the voice of the Latin America, because my continent, the whole American continent, was a land that was discovered by the conquistadors, but always was the land of nobody. The native population was present with a richness in all types, from the culture to the historical, but was always considered as an object and individual property. And we have historical evidence of that, slavery. Today, this population continues to be persons that are victims of racism, xenophobia, expulsion of their lands, making way for the mining and agro-industrial mega projects, and real estate speculation, police violence, and paramilitary militias, trafficking in persons, as was spoken before, organs, slave labor, that try to satisfy a well-thinking hypocrisy, sorry to say, of international relations, the conversion of their communities with beautiful forests, crystalline rivers, into toxic infernos because of the environmental degradation. I can say that this is a new type of colonialism, but in itself is a conflict zone, and is more insidious because occurs at the core of the social, economic, and political relations dominated by the ideologies of anti-racism, universal human rights, equality before the law, no discrimination, equality, dignity proclaimed for all creeds and religions, but it blooms in non-institutional, even a systemic, social apartheids. Both occurs in the street and at homes, in the prisons and in the universities, in the supermarket and in the police stations. One very little indicator of this, how to say, of this conflict, or the cost on life of these conflicts, is last year in Brazil was the number of people who died was 11% more than the previous year.
From the conflicts of Latin America, thank you, Sister Carmen, to our third panelist for today, Sister Monique Tarabay. She's from Syria, from Damascus. Her family still lives in Syria, despite the war that's been raging there for the past 7 years. Sister Monique is a Good Shepherd sister. She has a master's in graphic design, and she worked in her native country in Syria and in Lebanon before coming to Rome to serve as the communications coordinator for her congregation, so managing the website, the social media platforms, the trilingual newsletter, sharing some of the work that the Good Shepherd sisters are doing, not just in the Middle East where you're from, but in countries all around the world. Sister Monique, if you'd just like to introduce yourself for a moment.
Good morning, everyone. I am so grateful for the invitation. Thank you. My decision was to speak just for my experience in the mission, not touching so much my personal experience as family. It's just to do not enter into emotional things that I don't like to have it in public way. So it's just to say that also a short sentence to say that also my family has a part to express the violence of the war, and that give me maybe more courage to be more firm in helping other and be with other to let them speak, express themselves in their situation. So maybe my words today will be similar to all our sisters around the world, as we are presented in 74 countries. So maybe it will be similar to our sister in Congo, our sister in Peru, our sister in Lebanon, our sister in Brazil, in South Sudan. So maybe our experience of mission is the same in all those countries. And I want just to mention that and give honor to our sister in Peru, that one of them, Sister Agochita, she was killed in Peru. It's just because she was telling people and teaching people how they can be more close to God and be good in the society, teaching them how they can live it together. So in that, it was a price for her life, and never she go back to say, no, I cannot continue. She decided to continue till the end and be in the same image of our Good Shepherd. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Monique. We're talking about, as you say, very dramatic examples. We've already in the first couple of minutes heard about two sisters, one killed in South Sudan, another killed in Peru. And
One killed in Haiti.
in Haiti, exactly. There are plenty of examples. We all know somebody and some congregation that has been touched by this. And so my first question to you, Sister Judith, you mentioned that sisters, many of them, the congregations, were born during a time of conflict. And so, in a way, again, rediscovering the original charisms. But how difficult is it today for young sisters, particularly when they know they're going to a place where they will be in danger? How difficult is it for them, for tackling this kind of mission on the front lines?
Well, I don't think we receive any special preparation to go to these places. It's just our religious life consecration. Now perhaps some more skills. But I think if a young woman enters into a congregation and is attracted by the mission and being in the front line, you are ready to go. I mean, you know what you are doing. You could do many things in these days, in NGOs, in doing many things. So many people are asking to be in frontiers, in mission places that are not easy. We live in our own congregations, but in many. And this has the attractive of doing as our founders did, to respond to real needs where nobody can respond, or others can do emergency but not development, are not able to remain with people. So it's dangerous. I think it's many times dangerous for our communities and our families because they will suffer. But for the people who are there and the people I see in South Sudan being in these front lines, they're happy. They would never go away. So I think it's the spirit that pushes people to serve in these places.
And that develops a level of trust, doesn't it, between the sisters and the communities that they're serving. And yet you mentioned at the beginning, again, how sisters there have suffered the same fate as many of the people. They've been raped, they've been robbed, they've been attacked, and, as we've heard, they've been killed. What kind of support do you feel you have in this work?
Well, we have the support of the people, ordinary people, that see sisters as mothers, really mothers. We develop this motherhood. As sisters, we don't give birth, but we do give life, and people appreciate. Because also we are women, and we look, and we are vulnerable in a sense, in the most feminine sense, no? It's very easy for women and for children and young people to approach sisters. We are seen as mothers, and I have lots of images of sisters in South Sudan, and I can recall even a director of a farm taking care of women and children and widows, and also of the men employees, or other sisters taking care of 5,000 refugees every day, or another sister in a much silent way just sitting the whole afternoon after her work day, listening to adult students who come to show something, but mostly to share and heal pain and tell stories. No, so the image of a sister as a mother, I think, is so powerful for people and for ourselves, and it's fulfilling our vocation and our human nature. And I think it's something we need to deepen in it. We are like other women, and we are also mothers in that sense, and we have other kind, but many children. So this is, the support is first of all of the people. In Solidarity, we have the support of being together men and women religious, what is a lot. We know and feel the support of our men, members of communities. We don't feel alone, and when they are not there, sometimes have happened things that if they had been there, wouldn't have happened. So being together is very powerful to count on the support of the both unions of superiors, male and female, who are just thinking not only about community members, about governance, how to proceed in a better way, with so many ideas, is a huge support. We have the support of NGOs and people who are in the places and know how sisters and the communities are working because they trust us and they demand services. And also they demand collaboration, so we mainly have the support. It's difficult to say that we can have support of military governments. We don't have, but nobody has, so we don't expect. If the people are abandoned, we also will be abandoned by governments now.
It's a complex picture as you're talking about the situation in South Sudan, but this wealth of experience that you gather, and particularly this trust from people on the ground, makes you key players perhaps in the movement for mediation, in peacemaking. The role that women religious can and do play in peacemaking is vital, isn't it?
It's vital, the role of women, not only of women religious. For example, I can remember I wasn't there, the 101 days for prayer before the independence in South Sudan, where Katia Arata was very involved, and many women leaders of different religions. So the role of women, because they care about their families, education, children, and men, when they do dialogue about peace, they are thinking on sharing power, percentages of power and money, of course. They would never think about people. So this empowerment of women and trust comes because women are able to think about life of concrete persons, elderly, children, young people, their own families.
Sister Carmen, I'd like to ask you also that question about giving life. You've told me about some experiences of the way you've seen this life-giving energy that the sisters bring at work in your prison ministry, haven't you?
Yes. They are not my friends. I think what I experienced, because I work in the prison ministry, and I also share with other sisters in order to share here, that the prison ministry puts you at the center of one piece of our society who usually is just rejected because they did something that was punishable. But no matter how punishable was that is a person. And in all our service, we will work for the person because they are the center. And we will put them in that place, no? So our giving or building life relationships comes because we wanted to take out the best part of that person. God never feel disappointed with us. God always believe in God, in myself. So why I will not do the same with others? And the sisters in the prison ministry, especially now, is a tendency to work in what is called restorative justice. And what they are trying to do is just also bringing the best of the person who is in the prison and to best of the person who approach them, and tried that both sides, taking in account what is the history, personal history of those, come acknowledge that, and from that build a dialogue. This dialogue will benefit not only the person who is doing his punishment in the prison, but will help the whole society. But at the same time, working in that means you need to be critical. You need to analyze the causes. And we are facing, for example, in Brazil, that the inequality that is in the society is reproduced in more cruel way inside of the prisons. And the legal system is not helping. This punishment is just perpetuating the system and the inequalities. So, as example, I feel joy to share that, is last year, for example, in the Brazil, they formed a committee of 12 persons. 11 were law empowerment judge people, and one was a religious sister who was expertise in restorative justice. They first sit together, and after they work along the year, and they got the draft and the structure of the law that was already presented to the Congress in order to reform the penal code of Brazil. Okay, now the reality comes that the situation of Brazil, you all know, and that particular moment that Brazil is living will not put the reformation of the penal code as one of the most important. So we will need to work years and years to come out again with the implementation of this type. So that is one little example how the life relation that we tried goes to a specific points, and modifying or influence the institutions will help us to influence in the society.
This is very important, isn't it, in the work to bring about change in these crucial areas, and restorative justice, of course, a very important part of that work in prison ministry. In situations in the Middle East, though, in places like Syria, it's too early to be talking about these kind of steps, this kind of progress. Sometimes all you can do is just be there to help the victims of conflict, those who are suffering from the war. Tell us a little bit about perhaps some of your most poignant experiences of helping people there on the front lines in Syria.
I will be just reading some lines from our constitution to begin and to let you know how we work as a congregation. So we express our charism of merciful love through an apostolic life. The God who is rich in mercy sent his Son to bring good news to the poor, to set free the oppressed, to heal the contrite of heart, to seek and to save what was lost. So, if our constitution tells us to go to meet those people, so it's the minimum of the things to work with more vulnerable people as women and children, and especially girls. That my experience is before the war in Syria. I was working in Lebanon, and we received the Iraqi refugees in that time. And my work was with the children to let them express themselves about what they are living and what they lived before they arrived. So that was in a program to let them, every time we give them a topic and we let them drawing a situation. And after I discuss with them in a very creative way what they felt, why they wrote these things, and what they want to say if they put this, by example, broken heart in that time. So, and after, my task was to collect all this discussion and work with our professional team as psychologist and social worker and educator about what we will work with these children, if we have to work with their family or we have to work with himself or herself as a person, or we have to go and tell the family they have to change their area because their children, they are abused in this area. So you have to be careful that you have to move. That experience, it's totally different than the experience of emergency help of every day that we faced in Syria now. Now our work is with children and women especially. As we tell our children that the war and the aggressivity, it's not a normal life. It's not the life that we can live every day. That we help. Recently, I received this news from Homs that my sister, my blood sister, she worked now and she served in Homs. So they were working with a boy, 4 years old. He came every day to the school with a knife. So it's just they couldn't tell him, no, you cannot use it and you have to be out because his knife is not acceptable in this place. So they were working with him to teach him that the knife could be in the house, in the kitchen, in the place that where should be. Here, the school could be in our school kitchen, but not here in the classroom. And after they understood that this child, he came from Daraa, where he saw ISIS, they were killing people with a knife, and he came to the school to defend himself. That it's just, they took weeks to let him understand and convince him that this knife will not let him defend himself. If he has the right word, can be more stronger than a knife. Another example that we are working with women in that time, that we empower women to be strong enough for saving their life and their girl's life, daughter's life. It's just an example also. Before coming to Rome, I was in Damascus community for 3 months. At night, we heard the door knock, and when we opened it, we received one woman who arrived to our community, led by another woman. She was in our shelter before, helping her to arrive to us. And she was enabled to speak what the reason that she came here. So we put her separately to see what we can do with her. And after, I will just tell you the end of the story. After 7 months of therapy, she was able to hear the door opened and don't running and lay down on the floor, and prepared herself to be wrapped. Because during these 7 months, that was her reaction. Every day, every moment, she heard the door open. That's what she was practiced before arriving to us. So that we say that as a religious sister, we cannot do that by ourselves. It is the reason last summer I helped in Homs for 1 month formation for our young, if you can say, women and men. We empowered them. There is a director of institute in Canada. She came and she gave this session for them, how they can let other person pass his trauma and be a builder of bridges of peace during war, not after war.
Again, very dramatic experiences, and thank you for sharing some of them with us. You're talking, of course, about children growing up knowing nothing but this kind of terrible war and violence, a situation that, of course, you've seen. The region there, Sudan and South Sudan, has been at war for decades. And I'm wondering how you think that the sisters, they were very involved there during the independence referendum. There was great hopes for that, and yet those hopes seem to have been dashed again. We know Pope Francis wanted or wants to visit there with Archbishop Justin Welby, and yet the security is absolutely impossible to guarantee. The situation seems as bleak as it was over the past decades. Again, where do you draw your strength? What hope do you have for the work that you do and the way that it can impact, if at all, on the political situation?
Well, the work Solidarity is doing in South Sudan is mostly education in different fields: health, education, teacher training, agriculture, and pastoral with the Bishop Conference. But it's always capacity building skills for people in different areas. And we believe education is the way we can change things. This is a long-term impact, but we really see already benefits of this. For example, there's many students from our schools, they're adults, doing free teaching for children who have no teachers. The government is not paying salaries for more than a year and a half. So if you have no money, no school, even public, our own students in the Nuba Mountains go back to heal as nurses, midwives, as teachers. And we can see how they are mentalized to say we have to serve the people, to all the people. One of the assets, I think, and the impact we are making, even if we weren't doing anything, is the fact of living together, men and women of any kind of country. Each one is one different color, different nationalities, ages, make our students and people around us seeing if these people can live together, we can do it also. And they are proud of studying, living in their residential centers, living together tribes who outside are killing themselves. So just building this mentality that we can do peace together, we can build peace, a part of the trauma healing and peace building workshops we do, no? This is a huge impact. Also among women, the issue of the gender, one of the conflicts in Africa, I think, is this customary law that bans women not only of public life, but even from life. Men can do anything just covered by traditional law and customs. And this is terrible when you are in an African society fighting for life at war, because you have both conflicts. Women in refugee camps many times are the only one who can go out. If men go out, they can be shot. But men send women because they are only raped. So women suffer the rape, then they are marginalized by their own families because they have been raped, of course, and over that they suffer war and they have the responsibility of the family. So impacting on women and educating women and making also men to see women differently is a source of hope for us. And we can see it in our students. If you ask one of our students after passing 3 years with us about the rights of the women, they will answer, they have the same as us. They are as capable as we are. But if you ask this before they enter, they wouldn't know what to answer. If they don't experience it, they won't be able to do it. And I have to say that now I think we have a men religious director, but up to now all the directors of programs were women. So our adult men, students, they see what women are capable of. And this is ordinary teaching, not with words, but with witnessing that is going on.
So real changing of attitudes taking place. Sister Carmen, in the Latin American context, can you say the same? Can you say that there are changing attitudes, that there is a realization that women have the same rights and the same possibilities as men do in Latino society today? Big question, I know.
It's a big question, and I do not know if I am able to answer. But what I can say is it's a change. And for me, one of the signs of that change is, for example, the presence of the sisters in many of the conflict areas, and they are the one who are the guiding force, and the one who the people comes to consult them, no? Because for example, the sisters, when they are present to defend the rights of the indigenous, the right to have their own land, ancestor land, or the right of health for the indigenous people, are the sisters always, the women, the one that, and we know that not in all those societies the role of women was as high or was matriarchal, was especially patriarchal. I was last year in Paraguay, and for me was very touching to see the shamans of the tribes of the Aba Guarani, for example, coming to our sister. But she is more than 40 years working with them. So they already recognize that, okay, it's a woman, but this woman brought wisdom, courage to our situation. So all the education they receive in order to defend their right, all the benefits when they got the law of health, all those, even the courage to face the multinationals who are trying to build the dam and that sequestering their land, was thanks to a little woman. So they come and they are only now asking for the wisdom of that woman. So for me, that are little changes in the society. Also, I felt in the conflicts like in Colombia, where the sisters are that women, that mother, that sisters who receive all the unburdened and all the sorrows of the people, but also the one who is able to celebrate with them. So those little steps are showing that the sister is able, or the women is able to go and accompany the society, to accompany them to recognize the dead, to recognize their right, but also to celebrate life. So for me, are, as I said, I would like to repeat, are little signs of that women has a place, and an important place that cannot be excluded in the society, even in our macho Latin American.
Women, as you say, who are really be able to bring the experience, all the experiences of the society to the people in places of power, perhaps, and to affect changes over the long term, as you say, through this education process. But I'm thinking, for example, in the Middle East, Sister Monique, I mean, there are times when it's impossible to speak out. It's dangerous to speak out. You have to somehow stay neutral. You have to find a way of getting the message across without risking more than necessary your own lives. How do you deal with these kind of very difficult and dangerous political challenges?
Well, personally for me it's very difficult to a woman, and especially women religious, to be neutral and do not do nothing in a situation. As they mentioned, that women religious, they are mothers also, and the mother, she knows the needs of her children. So I think we speak out in our way with respect and not judging and blaming anybody, but we speak the truth. By example, and maybe in some situations we can be the voice of hope for the people they don't have voice and they cannot speak out in many situations. Like also in 2015, the most beautiful point that in Syria, the women religious in the all congregations, they work together. They have something very nice, that everything is they discuss everything together. It's not just, this situation is just for me and I don't share with other congregation. No, they share everything together to see a better solution, and who is the congregation who can do to make difference in this situation better than the other congregation. So before, in 2015, I had a chance to go and visit our First Lady Asma al-Assad in the palace, and it was the Mother's Day, and we hold for her all the letters from mother that their children were died or their children were kidnapped. And we try to tell her that how the peace is very important, and those people, they are mothers and they should be happy with their family, living with their children. And in that point, I think I felt that we were heard, and many many things happened for some of the families. They were very happy with the result, and I was happy too.
So small signs of change. I'm going to ask all three of you the question, what would you most like to see in terms of this wealth of experience that you and all your sisters have on the ground, at the grassroots? What changes would you most like to see in terms of that experience being fed into policies, government policies, or even indeed in the churches, changes in the church, to make sure that this experience that you have and on a daily basis, to make sure that it's really effecting change at the highest level? Sister Judith.
For example, one of the things, and I think first in the church, I will say, after in the countries, but in our church, the same experience we are living together in our communities, men and women together, really complementing the good sense, just bringing each of us our differences, our things that could be reproduced in the church, in higher levels, not only in communities. I'm amazed that our African bishops in South Sudan, for them it's natural to have mixed communities. It's not evident for most of bishops, but for ours that have seen 10 years communities going on very well, for them it's absolutely natural, no? And the level of sharing, we share vocation, we share mission, we share life, can be reproduced in many levels in the church, no? And this is encouraging, and we were talking how to promote this kind of dialogues, where the inside, all stages of the stances of the church, we can work together from equality. I have good experiences of it, some others not so good, but in general, I'm very hopeful. At the level of countries, and in concrete in South Sudan, I think it's more difficult because we are under military governments, and until a civil platform takes over the government, I don't think many things could be possible. But for example, the same fact of having workshops for reconciliation and trauma healing, I know in Rwanda there was a national process that went on about reconciliation. South Sudan needs something like this. I don't think it's now the moment with the government we have. But it's needed a kind of huge process in which women are involved. For example, I dream to have women in the Council of Churches. The problem is that women are not very present in their churches, so how do you meet women in this council? No? They have to find ways to include women in the Council of Churches at the same level as men. No? From sisters, lay women, there are many people. And also, for example, how can women be heard and take part in, not only in peace dialogues, but in designing peace processes? Because up to now, the results of peace processes are just sharing power and money without any result, just more victims. If women are included as part and as head, leading this kind of processes, I think this would make a big change in South Sudan in many places.
I hear again and again that same message that where women are included at the highest level in peacemaking and in signing, as you say, being absolutely present at the crucial stages of the peace process, then that peace is much more likely to stick, to last. Sister Carmen, just a quick word, changes that you would like to see perhaps to help this experience really bear more fruit in countries in Latin America.
I will say that the change for me will be that we recognize who is the woman and all the characteristics that our feminine side can contribute. And for that, it's also important that the men know who they are. So if both sides know who they are, we can dialogue. And in that dialogue, we can include the contribution of both. Because one of the, preparing for this panel, one of the things that I reflect the most is what is characteristic in myself. And I learned that what we always call the vulnerability of women, that is our strength. Because we allowed ourselves to be touched for the situation, so we can sense what is going, so our contribution will be more powerful, more direct, and will involve the whole community in that sense, no? So this vulnerability that we sometimes have is not a sign of weaknesses, it's our strength, because the peace will be built only if the dignity is restored in the victim and in the victimizer. So, and to be allowed touching by our own emotions, our own self, is the way to build that lasting peace. So I will say that, like Judith said, please include us, but include us as we are, respecting that characteristic. And this is just one step ahead that we can bring hope and life to the people.
And Sister Monique, hopes for change. I'm sure you have many hopes for change in your own country, but perhaps changes that you would like to see so that this vital work the sisters are doing can be part of the peace process, can be part of a better future in that whole region.
Maybe I believe, and I will just share what I believe. I believe that the small things can make a difference, even from my position as a normal woman, as a normal sister, as a province leader. In each position, I can make difference, and that will be heard if I am sincere, and I know what I want. That will be heard, and that will be making difference for peace and for better life for all of us. So,
thank you. My timekeeper here telling me we've got just about 10 minutes to open up the conversation to the floor. I'm sure, again, you have questions for our three panelists here. If you'd like to just say briefly who you are and keep your questions, please, as short as possible. Yes, over in the middle there, down the end.
Hello, I'm Hannah Broadcast from Catholic News Agency. This whole conference is specifically about women religious, and obviously there are other missionaries who are men or men religious, but I was hoping you could speak more about what women, you were just touching on it a minute ago, but more about what women specifically bring to these areas, both in human trafficking and in war zones.
Particular, perhaps, gift, the charism of women in the war zones. How would you define, if you had to summarize the particular gift of women religious in the war zones, what would it be?
Maybe I can say that when we work in our charism, that we can see that we are not just working with one religion or one nationality or just for my people. That, by example, for us, our mission is for anyone in need, if he is Muslim or from other country. So I think as women that we can do it, to accept everybody, to welcome everybody, and in the end we can celebrate a new life for them, in a new stage of life for each one of them.
From my point of view, and looking in South Sudan and going through some experiences, I think women religious and women can remain with the people who are attacked, who have suffered the consequences of war, and help them and support them. And I have the thinking of many sisters accompanying communities who had to escaping with them, suffering the same difficulties. And I recall another day in one of our centers we were threatened that some tribe will enter and kill some of students of our tribes. And I recall the director whose superior is here saying, they won't enter. We will do our vigil at night. We remain together. If they want to kill our students, they will kill us first. Now, this kind of protection of assurance of life of others, I think is the best asset we women and women religious can give.
Sister Carmen, yes.
No, I would like just to add one element. Women, in general, we are a good keeping and tracking success and what happened. So we cannot build reconciliation without a memory. So we can contribute in that, building and really healing the memories, but not denying the situation. And this is a very helpful element that as a women we can contribute. And other side, for example, just another element is we women are always getting a lot of jokes because our multitasking. We can do several things at the same time. And I personally discovered that this is helpful in this situation because we will build the trust of the people, we will mourn with them, we will accompany them in a pain when we are cooking for them, if we are curing the sick, if we are making a research in the university, no matter what we do, but we can do simultaneously many things, and that is a characteristic that helps us to be in the middle with the people.
Thank you. Yes. Other questions? Yes, one over here. In the third row there, thank you.
I would have really had two questions, but I will just, not questions really, is comment. It's on the issue of gender relations in conflict, where women are supposed to be part of the processes that will lead to perhaps peace and so on, peace negotiations. From my experience, because I've been involved in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and even Guinea-Bissau, I discovered that these negotiations are done at the, in the day, but the major decisions are taken late at night. So how many women will be able to stay up till 4 a.m. when the major decisions are taken? I'll stop at that. Thank you.
To react to those comments about sleepless nights and the need to be constantly vigilant, perhaps, at being involved in the discussions?
Well, I think women are really vigilant during nights. If we think of mothers just waking up every night with babies, they have this special ability of functioning the following day, But it's true that women are charged with lots of responsibilities that means work, and they are extremely tired. So this plays a lot in the responses that women can do, and they have no secure or safe place to rest and recover forces. They have to feed others before themselves. So it makes them more vulnerable to be able to confront some of these areas.
Other questions from the floor? We've got time for maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up this second panel.
Which is also very important. And this one has to do with what preparation do you give to sisters before they are inserted into conflict regions? Very important that they must know that wars or conflicts these days are not actually between states, but intra-states, which means that there are non-state actors who are playing parts and are not conversant with Geneva Convention and international humanitarian laws. Therefore, they are not bound to play according to the rules. And therefore, sisters must actually be allowed to work in the safe havens, not in the war front, because of their personal safety. Thank you.
Monique, would you like to perhaps reflect on that question, or Sister Judith, either of you? Yeah? Mm-hmm.
Actually, yes. To be in any stage in a religious life, should the sister be prepared? And in our congregation, we ask too much about the education of the sisters, the capacity building. We did a formation for all the sisters to be able to know about religion, about the society that they are living in, and the conflict about religion. By example, in Lebanon, when I was working there, we had a very big formation to prepare ourselves to work with women. They are Christian married with a Muslim, and if she married with a Muslim Shiite is different than she is married with a Muslim Sunnite or Alawite. I don't know if you say that in English the same. We use it in French. So it's very different. So if a woman coming and telling us her problem, should be prepared to answer her and refer her to the person that can help her, and to see who is the lawyer can work with her in this point that she's asking of help, as if we are working with children or if we are working with women or a family. That really is very important to the sister have knowledge of what she is working in.
Sister Judith, would you like to add anything to that need for formation of the sisters in the complex war situations you're working in?
In South Sudan, the first step it was taken was to form sisters in trauma healing and peace building, just to be able to cope themselves with these conflicts. Because if even church personnel were the first who received this kind of formation, because they needed, they weren't able to help anybody if they didn't have their own selves, the capacity in themselves. And on other hands, sometimes war comes to you. You are never prepared to war or what can happen. So in this sense, it's very difficult how to prepare yourself for an attack. What I have seen is that you can support 2 attacks. The third, you can't. So we just see vulnerability coming up, but you are never prepared. You are never prepared to atrocities that we hear and we see. So it's very difficult to get this preparation.
We have 1 minute, my timekeeper is telling me. Is there anybody else who'd like to put a question to our panel before we wrap up this section? I'd like to welcome Archbishop Paul Gallagher, the Vatican Secretary for Relations with States, who's joined us and who will be offering his own reflections in just a moment. But time for one more question, if anybody would like to put a question to our panelists today. Yes, please.
Hello. There's no word to describe what the kind of work you are doing right now for helping people. But on the other side, how the people, the women that you help, was integrated in the society. How? And if I know, you know.
Very quickly, in a sentence, can you sum up the way that the work that you're doing, how that helps women to be integrated back into society again?
In capacity building, teacher training, nurse training, any kind of training we do, this is the mean of integrating women back into society, even to take positions that they never had, traditional they didn't have before. So it's very important, the empowerment of women. Even from school, secondary, primary schools, what is done at school, no? The problem sometimes is that they don't have the space nor the capacity to have those decisions implemented, because there are no civil platforms for them to act. And sometimes churches don't offer the equal situation as to men. So many of them are prepared. I've seen many, for example, ex-Loreto students from Rumbek in South Sudan with licenses finished with nothing to do in South Sudan, because there's no place for them there unless they enter an NGO. So the society has to be prepared to welcome the people who are formed and the women.
Yes, just one example. The sisters from my congregation in Paraguay, they are working with the Aba Guaranis indigenous people. After more than 40 years, now and defending not only the right of lands, but also the language that will not be lost, because if we lost the language, we lost the people and the history of the people. So they will promoting and empowering women, and now the women are the teachers who are teaching their own people to keep the language.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I think you'd all like to perhaps join me in thanking very much our speakers for today on this second panel. Is that on? Yeah. Okay. So again, a big thank you to all the panelists, first on the anti-trafficking panel, and then on the panel about women working in the front lines in conflict zones around the world. From the first panel, we heard about the extraordinary work of the Talitha Kum network, what it's doing in over 70 countries worldwide to try and combat slavery and trafficking. We heard about how encouraged these people are by the voice of Pope Francis, the way he has spoken out about this crime against humanity, and the way he's encouraged sisters and brothers and lay people to get out and to continue being there on the front lines with the most marginalized communities. We heard about the staying power of the sisters, the people who remain there when all the other organizations, the United Nations, the NGOs, find it too dangerous and pull out. The sisters are very often the people who will stay there and support their communities. And we heard about the progress, some small seeds of progress that is being made. In Africa, we heard Blessing with her wonderful witness telling us about traditional leaders engaging with the cultural aspects of trafficking and slavery in Nigeria to try and tackle the problem. In Asia, we heard too in the Philippines about education, the vital importance of educating, about tackling cyber porn as one of the new and ugliest faces of this problem. But we heard also about how much more needs to be done in countries where governments still deny that it is a problem, still deny the existence of trafficking. And we heard about the need for closer collaboration within the church, and closer collaboration, particularly engaging with men as well, to tackle the education of men and boys, to talk about the issue of the clients. It's not just the survivors of trafficking, but it's the men who seek their services. And so I think I'd like to say that perhaps the ideas that came out of that panel were the need for this valuable experience that the sisters have been getting from the last 2-3 decades of work in the anti-trafficking field. How can this experience be put to better use in formulating government policy? I know that the US Embassy, and indeed my own government, the British government, is also working very closely through the Santa Marta process. There are some wonderful examples of governments working with the Women Religious to make sure that this experience doesn't just serve at local level, but can be incorporated into helping formulate government policy at the highest level. In our conflict panel just now, we've been hearing again some wonderful experiences, wonderful and yet very dramatic experiences of women working in war zones in Africa, particularly in the context of South Sudan there, in Latin America and in the Middle East, in war-torn Syria, hearing about the role of women working in healing and reconciliation, the healing of memories, to try and lay the groundwork for a dialogue, a negotiation, a peace process. Been hearing about restorative justice and the importance of this work, not just in countries actually in conflict, but in conflicts within countries and within societies themselves. So particularly Sister Carmen talking about her work in prison ministry. How the sisters suffer with their people, and that's why there is such a relationship, a strong relationship of trust. The sisters work alongside people every day. They celebrate with them. They share the best times and the worst times, mourning with them as they bury their children, as they try to find their family members who've been kidnapped. We heard about particularly what it is that women bring, this, if we want to call it multitasking, or these particular strengths that women, and particularly women religious, can bring in helping to be peacemakers in their societies, in their countries. And again, how this experience must be brought to bear on the church to help the church be more effective in this work of peacemaking, peace-building, reconciliation, and also within society at large, how their experiences, how their voices can be better heard, particularly, as you were saying, in situations where women are traditionally not expected to be speaking at the level of the negotiating table. How can the church help to bring those voices to the fore? How then can all this experience of women religious be used and be supported by the church hierarchy, not to be seen just as an on-the-ground resource, but to be seen as real partners in mission and as partners for the future of our societies? So I'm going to ask Archbishop Paul Gallagher now to come and respond to that. Sister Judith will introduce Archbishop Paul for us.
I'm really pleased to introduce and welcome Archbishop Gallagher. His Excellency Archbishop Paul Gallagher is, as we have heard, is the Secretary of Relations with the States, second section of the Secretary of Vatican State. We thank you very much for your presence today, and we warmly welcome in this symposium that seeks to enhance and promote the influence of religious sisters in the church and in national policies. Just to talk a little bit about him, because we may not know him, Archbishop Gallagher is from Liverpool, British, and he was ordained as priest in this archdiocese. He served as parish priest and hospital chaplain. He's licentiate in spirituality and also a doctorate in canon law. He entered the diplomatic school of Vatican, and he became a member of the Vatican diplomacy in 1984. He has held posts in Tanzania, Uruguay, Philippines, and the Vatican Secretary of State before, and also in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. He was appointed Apostolic Nuncio to Burundi, where he took over from a murdered nuncio and also experienced bombing and war. And then he was later appointed to Guatemala and Australia until he came to Rome in 2014, appointed by Pope Francis as the Secretary of Relations with States. So he's like a foreign minister of the Vatican. He's fully committed in peace building in our world, and we know the ongoing conflicts of our world, so it's a very hard task to promote peace. In 2015, he promoted and signed an agreement with Palestine to promote this type of agreements and try to stimulate peace in this area. He has represented the Holy See before the United Nations and claiming for the weapons embargo, denouncing the lack of accomplishment of international treaties and advocating for human rights in many levels. Personally, I am very pleased to introduce him because I have a pending thank you for this year. In his section, when you remember we organized the prayer and the roundtable for peace in South Sudan and Congo, his section was extremely welcoming us, supportive, and for me was a wonderful surprise as a women religious to be supported and promoted by the section. So, Archbishop, thank you for this. Also for presenting to the Pope the idea of the day of fast and prayer for South Sudan and Congo. We thank you for your collaboration and your presence here today.
Thank you, Sister, for your kind words of introduction. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Callista Gingrich and the U.S. Embassy for the invitation to join you this morning. You have two problems when you come in to do the final gig at one of these things, is that you haven't heard what has been said beforehand, so you don't really know what you're talking about, though I do thank Philippa for the summary of some of the panels. And secondly, there is a danger of coming in and reading a very beautiful and edifying speech, which I have here, actually, a beautiful, edifying speech, which has been put together at great pains by one of my staff. So I read that, and I thought that it was a very good speech, but I thought that I would actually speak to my understanding of the theme of your meeting here this morning, and that I would speak from my own experience. As you heard from my hagiographical biography, which was presented to you, I've never managed to do a job for very long. So they kept moving me from one place to another so that I wouldn't do too much damage. I think that was the idea. But in the course of that, I have accumulated certain experiences, and I've seen certain things. And so I'm going to talk about the things that I have seen and touched, seen with my eyes and touched with my hands, if you like. The first thing actually is skipping almost up to the present. When I first got this job of being Secretary of Relations with States, the first Bishops' Conference that came to visit the Holy See was from North Africa. And each of the bishops, whether they're from Morocco or Algeria or elsewhere, Tunisia, they made their presentations. And at that time, Libya was, I think, even in more chaos than it is today. And we had in Libya at that time two very, very elderly bishops. One was Italian, one was Maltese. And they were unable to participate in the particular meeting that I attended, though one of them was part of the group. And they were represented by a Franciscan who was the Vicar General of Benghazi, I think. And this father then made a presentation about what was the situation of the Catholic Church in Libya following the fall of Gaddafi and everything that went with that. And the thing that surprised me was that he said, well, the Catholic Church in Libya was always built around the sisters. I thought, well, that's rather interesting. Normally it's built around parishes and parish priests and things like that. But no, in Libya it was built around the sisters, in that the sisters were offering some very basic services to Libyan society in general, particularly in terms of education and healthcare. And the majority of the Catholics in the country were migrant workers from sub-Saharan Africa, Philippines, other places like that. And they would come for worship and for support and for guidance and for everything to the communities of the sisters who were around these places, the hospitals, the clinics, the small schools, etc., etc. And the crisis of the Catholic Church in Libya following on from what took place at the end of the Gaddafi regime, was that it was no longer possible for the majority of these sisters to remain in the country. It was just too dangerous, and their religious superiors invited them to come home. With the disappearance of those sisters, then the Catholic community, to a very large extent, dissolved. Of course, many of the migrant workers also left, and people then many of the sub-Saharan Africans would have made the dangerous crossing of the Mediterranean towards Europe. But it was interesting for me to discover that the sisters had been in that way so fundamental to the structure and the life of the church in that way. And we pray that that may be, again, the reality in the future. At the moment, there are just one bishop and a few priests in various parts of the country, and I think that there are some sisters there now, but not very many. Anyway, that's a front line. It's a different sort of front line, perhaps, than the one you've been talking about here this morning, but it was a front line in which the sisters had a vital role within the life of the church, and indeed within the life of society in that country at the time. The second place I want to talk is the first place I was a nuncio was Burundi, and as it was mentioned, I arrived there in the wake of the murder of Archbishop Michael Courtney, who was my predecessor, and the country was still formally in a state of civil war, but I persevered through that, and indeed my successor, Archbishop Franco Coppola, came to think. And then there took place something really, really terrible. Near on the outskirts of the city of Bujumbura, there is an area of the city called Kamenge, which is quite famous because it's been a site of many of the tribal conflicts and the ethnic struggles of Burundi over the years. And in that community, they were cared for by a group of Xaverian missionaries, missionary fathers and missionary sisters. And the fathers tended to look after the church and the activities within the four walls and the catechesis, and they ran a youth center on behalf of the Archdiocese of Bujumbura. The sisters, they had all sorts of activities. And this was a really hot spot in the city of Bujumbura. It always was. And with the deteriorating situation a few years ago, it became even more difficult for the people to live there. There was a great deal of ethnic tension again. And three of these sisters, Xaverian missionary sisters, Kamenge, Olga Raschietti, Lucia Palucci, and Benedetta Bogyan, were horrifically murdered. And I was already, as I said, no longer the nuncio, I was in Guatemala, but when I heard the news of this murder and the actual details of the murder as well, when meeting with the superiors general of the sisters, it was really unbelievable, the atrocity that had been committed against them. And like so many things that took place in that country, like the murder of Archbishop Courtney, so with the sisters and other missionaries and other people, there is no real light ever been shone on those horrific events. But these were sisters, and none of them were young, who had dedicated literally decades and decades of their lives to the well-being of the people of Central Africa, Burundi, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. That, for me, was a real moment of realization of what commitment means and what it means to be on a front line in a essentially missionary situation, yes, but also in a complicated socio-political situation. Second place I'd like to take you to is Guatemala, where I went afterwards. Guatemala was interesting because people said, you got sent to Guatemala as a prize for having persevered in Burundi for 5 years. And I quickly found myself in a slightly more dangerous place than Burundi. While I was there, I was a great friend of a community in Antigua, Guatemala, of Mercedarian fathers. And the Mercedarian order was founded in the 13th century by St. Peter Nolasco, and they were founded to ransom Christians from the Moors. That was the original idea that in Spain. And obviously, like all religious orders, they felt very much the strong call to modernize their apostolate. What does it mean to redeem from slavery today? And I think you have been discussing amongst yourselves this morning a lot of what that means in the modern world today. But the fathers there were very engaged, together with a network of other religious, many of whom were religious women, in trying to be of assistance to young women and girls who were fleeing trafficking, prostitution, and other forms of contemporary slavery. And they ran throughout the country a couple of safe houses. They ran one in Antigua, Guatemala, 30 kilometers outside the capital city. And there they received periodically a number of young women who eventually were to be helped then to go back often to their country of origin, because many of them were not Guatemaltecas originally. And involved in this, as I said, there were many young religious women who were obviously in a much stronger position maybe than the men to be able to assist and to make contact with them. And there was one particular sister who lived and worked in a city called Chimaltenango, which is about 50 kilometers from Guatemala City. If those people who go and visit Lake Atitlan, which is the big tourist zone to the west of Guatemala City, you pass along the highway and you go through Chimaltenango, which is one of the most unattractive cities on the face of the earth. But it is unfortunately notorious for its sex industry. And the sisters were working there, and they were rescuing a number of girls who were taking refuge with them, and then they would move them on to safe houses and hopefully to a better life afterwards. But of course, whenever you get involved in these sort of things, you make a lot of powerful and dangerous enemies. And there was one sister I remember who they had to get out of the country very, very quickly. Otherwise, we know what would have happened to her. And so this was an example of, yes, commitment, an apostolate, and a work of the gospel, which was incredibly important, incredibly vital, but at very high-risk activity indeed. And the work still goes on. I'm still in touch with the Mercedarian fathers who were doing that work, but not without great difficulties and not without running those risks as well. So there was a sister who was literally on the front line, on the main road, helping women in difficulty. But in the end, the forces were such that she had to save her life, had to get out of the country and return to her original country, which I frankly can't remember. I think she may have been Colombian originally. So we've been to Libya, we've been to Burundi, we've been to Guatemala. I want to then take you to a different sort of front line, a front line in the outback of Australia, which I was the nuncio there for 2 very happy years. And on my first Easter in Australia, there was a diocese which was vacant. And of course, when dioceses are vacant, the Holy See always gets blamed. You say, well, Holy Father hasn't appointed a bishop quickly enough. And in fact, this diocese hadn't had a bishop for about 5 years. So I, out of shame, suggested to the bishop who was the administrator, I said, well, maybe I could go and stand in at Easter. So I went. This diocese was called, and is called today, Wilcannia Forbes. And so I went to the city where the cathedral was. The cathedral is in a place called Broken Hill, which is a 18th, 19th century mining town that sort of went belly up about 50 or 60 years ago. And when the mining sort of stopped, the bishop moved his house to the other end of the diocese. And between the bishop's house in the city of Forbes and Broken Hill, it takes you 9 hours to drive. So you don't do it that often. So anyway, I went there for Easter and did the ceremonies for them. And on one day, the priest who was looking after the parish, he said, would you like to go and visit this particular town, which was down on the Darling River. The Darling River is one of the most famous rivers in Australia, which runs along the border of New South Wales and Victoria. And we went there to a small town, which at one time, I think, had a parish priest. It no longer had. And so we went to visit the church. And the church in this town was a Catholic primary school, which was doing very good work, and a community of sisters. And I think there were just 2 sisters, but they were frequently had visitors, and so sometimes the numbers were up. Now, this town had one particular characteristic in that it had a very, very strong Aboriginal community, a very strong Aboriginal population. And it was a population which was in great, great difficulty. Aboriginal society in Australia has many, many challenges. And particularly for the young people, maintaining a spirit of hope, purpose amongst young Aboriginals is not easy, as anybody who's had contact with them will know. And so these sisters were working with them, and they had the, I think, awful challenge of having to deal with families in great distress, because many of the young Aboriginal men and even teenage boys sadly committed suicide. Their sense of desperation was so great. And these sisters were really, again, on another sort of front line. And this was the front line of people's despair, their lack of purpose, and the sisters were doing great work on that. So they would conduct the funerals. There was the basic rites of the Catholic Church, but adapted also to the needs of the Aboriginal population. And it was really edifying because, again, as I said, there was hours and hours and hours from any real support from other church institutions, and yet they were persevering, living in very simple arrangements. As they had a small sort of like shop on the main high road, which they used as a sort of chapel, community house, counselling centre, drop-in place, and anything, you name it, they did it in that little shop on the high street. Now, all of these things that I've said to you, that I've mentioned to you, whether it's the sisters who, being the centres of the Catholic community in Libya, the Burundians, the Zaverian sisters in Burundi, who were caring for communities, again, under great pressure through the civil and political and ethnic conflicts in their country. The trafficking problems of Guatemala in Central America. And here, the challenges of living in outback Australia, where sisters were caring for Aboriginal communities, which were really in a very desperate situation. For me, these are all examples of religious women living on the front lines, working on the front lines, living out their faith in these places, having to invent, having to draw on all their resources, the resources of their faith, the resources of the spirituality of their individual congregations, and giving enormous witness to the church and to Christ in these various situations. In all of these things, and in the 30-odd years that I've been doing this diplomatic job on behalf of the Holy See, everywhere I've been, there have been women like this. And I have no doubt that women like this will continue to serve the church, to serve humanity, and to serve Christ in the future. And for that, I give thanks. And I thank you, too, for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Archbishop Gallagher. Your Excellency, Ambassador Gingrich, Sister Pat, Sister Judith, all of our panelists, and our audience. I think it is very clear from our discussion today that women's voices and the incredible work of women religious on the front lines are absolutely critical to global security, prosperity, and peace. We hope our discussion today has not only illustrated the remarkable contributions of women religious across the globe, but has also inspired you and given you some new energy and ideas on how we can best engage with the international community of women religious going forward. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See, the Union of International Superiors General, and Solidarity for South Sudan, thank you very much for coming today. And I hope you'll all join us for lunch next door. Thank you.